Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at 10 slang terms from the Regency period, the time of Jane Austen. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? One of the most beautiful things about language are idioms. Those turns of phrase which capture an idea, an emotion, the image of something better than a correctly formed phrase. They're far more vivid, colourful, emotion-stirring, smile-inducing than just standard words. And idioms are also good in understanding a bit of the background and what the undercurrents of society were actually like. We find a lot just by the way that people spoke and thought. So in no particular order, let's get on with some of the slang terms in Jane Austen's day, the Regency period. Imagine you saw someone, a friend, or maybe you're at a party and you saw somebody who looked particularly down in the mouth and miserable, and you wanted to pass comment on them. You could call them Friday-faced. I say, have you seen Mr. Hopworth? He's looking very Friday-faced. Now, Friday-faced means sort of very miserable and lacking in pleasure, and it derives from the fact that Friday is traditionally a day of fasting before Sabbath day. So for those who are very pious, they would fast on Friday, and naturally, if you told most people that they had to fast, or especially children, the kind of long face that you'd get at the thought of not being able to eat would make you look rather miserable. And so if you're at some salon or soiree, you can say, "Goodness me, can you see her over there? How Friday-faced." That's slang term number one. Following on from Friday-faced, that same idea of people being down in the dumps, if you had someone that looked particularly sullen, maybe they had the weight of the world on their shoulders or were brooding darkly over some horrible event that had happened to them, and perhaps you couldn't get a word out of them because they didn't want to talk, you could call them mute as Mumchance. So you go up to your friend, you ask him how he is, nothing comes back, and you say, "Come on, Squeers, what's wrong with you? You're mute as Mumchance." So, how do we get sullen from mute as Mumchance? Well, mute, obviously that's self-explanatory, not talking. Mumchance, on the other hand, seems a bit curious. But it derives from a game, a gambling game of dice. And mum, when we say mum's the word, a mummer is someone that speaks lowly and began to be used as someone that didn't speak at all, so a mute. And in this game of chance, you would cast your dice, but the person whom you were going to contest against wasn't someone you could pick. Like in other games you could say, "I'm going to challenge you, I'll bet you such and such." With this one you had to remain quiet while your opponent was picked. So it was a game of chance in which you had to remain silent, Mumchance. So when someone was down in the dumps brooding over something or didn't want to talk, you could say to them, "By golly, you're mute as Mumchance." Our third slang term reminds us that the period of the Regency was not one of moral refinement and goodness and cleanness and brightness, but actually there was much behind the veneer of morality which was rather seedy. And that term is ladybird. Do you know what a ladybird was? Well, it was a man's mistress. So perhaps you're at a garden party held by the Duchess of Haworth, and you're asked where your close friend Baron Smidginbottom is, to which you reply with a knowing look, "He's off for a walk in the maze with his ladybird," meaning he's gone a-wandering with his mistress. And don't you just love the phrase ladybird? Because ladybirds are so pretty. They're actually an insect, but they are very pretty, and they have the roses and the beauty spots which you would imagine to find on a mistress. So there's our third slang term, ladybird, a mistress. Staying in the groove of ladybirds and mistresses, we come to the slang term bird of paradise. Now, bird of paradise is not a mistress, so can you guess what it is? A bird of paradise is a girl or woman of easy virtue. So, if you were to think of Lydia Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, she flirts with all of the, the regimental soldiers, doesn't she? And she catches the eye of Wickham. Now, you can imagine those soldiers talking after an evening out and saying that young Lydia Bennet is a bird of paradise, is not she? That's the kind of thing they might have said. It means a girl of easy virtue, a flirt. Someone that you could take a tumble with if you could just sort of insinuate yourself into their good graces enough. And from that phrase, bird of paradise, and others like it, down into the 20th century, you got the derogatory term for a girl or a girlfriend being your bird. But actually it implies easy virtue. So no wonder girls have wanted to do away with that expression, as it's not very flattering at all. Coming in place number 5 in our terms of slang in the Regency period is one of my favourites. Remember, this was a time of wit and playing with words. And what we have here is a word which sounds very Latin, but for a very ignoble cause. And that expression is the cut circumbendius. I love this one. The cut circumbendius means to dodge out of someone's way, to keep out of their way. Maybe you've got some uncouth suitor that you don't want the attentions of, say a Mr. Collins type, and when you see his carriage drawing up, as Kitty did, she was like, "Law, I'm getting out of here." Lizzie could have been forgiven for saying to Jane, "I'm going to take the cut circumbendius." In other words, I'm going to dodge out of the way. Now, this would normally be not when someone was visiting, but if you were out on the street or you were headed somewhere, you may have been going to a place, and because this person is in your path, you think, I'm going to take a different cut. Now, normally we talk about the short cut, the short way. You trim off part of a way by cutting across it. But this is the cut circumbendius. Well, circum means around, doesn't it? And bendius, going around the houses. So there is slang term number 5, to make the cut circumbendius. Our next 3 are all going to be dealing with how somebody looks, to be in fashion, to be someone that is beautiful or highly regarded. You know, if you see them and want to chatter to your friends about how gorgeous they are or how handsome he is, then these are the phrases that you might use. Number 6 is the simple in twig. Isn't that great? You would use this sentence, for instance, with Marianne saying of Willoughby, "Well, he's in twig." What that means is perhaps he's got the perfectly cut coat and the silk waistcoats, and he's got the beautiful breeches and boots and hat, and he just looks the mode of fashion. You would say he is in twig, or she is in twig. On the contrary, if you met someone who maybe was trying their best to raise their station or to look like a dandy to impress other people, but maybe they're of lower station, you could say that they were very out of twig. In other words, unfashionable. The actual background to where this expression comes from is rather vague, disputed, or even non-existent. It may be that this was referring to the trees and the bushes and the bracken of winter and early spring that was Spartan and bare and rough. But after spring comes forth, they start to show forth their beauty. You start seeing the foliage dotting over them because these lovely plants are now in twig. So somebody that is in twig is putting on the proper raiment, the proper fineries. Someone out of twig is still looking as cankerous as an old conker. Now, a much more embellished version of saying that somebody is in twig is to say that they are the pinkest of the pinks. This has nothing to do with the colour pink. In fact, the word pink referencing the colour only appears in the 1800s. So up to the Regency period, which is 1789, it's classically said to begin, pink isn't the colour we're talking about. Rather, a pink is a flower. A flower that for much of the Renaissance was classed as the finest of flowers, that which today we call dianthus. Remembering that at the Regency period, a shift had moved from Renaissance thinking to the more romantic, moving away from just hard logic and calculation and the scientific method of trying to explain everything, which seems to rob life of all of its joy. The romantic was coming back in, and looking back to the old artists like Raphael and Michelangelo and all that era, the pinks were some of their greatest paintings. And so, to call someone the pinkest of the pinks, being as the pink is the highest rated flower, the pinkest of them is the absolute belle of the ball, or the finest dandy amongst all the men. So if you've met someone while hobnobbing down Brighton or on your tour through Bath, and your friends ask, well, what's he like? You could say, Lord, girls, he's the pinkest of the pinks. Or if the lad said, so what's this young Sarah like? You could say, lads, she is the very pinkest of the pinks. Our eighth slang term is also to do with if someone is really good looking or beautiful. And that phrase is, they are all the crack. Which today would mean something totally different. In some circles, that's probably still a compliment to be all the crack. But back then, all the crack meant the very best. So this could be in terms of someone's refinement and beauty. It could be their position in society. They are all the crack. And crack meant back then, its actual origin, meant bragging or effusive praise would be better. Really building someone up. So when you said, oh, he is all the crack, or she is all the crack, or maybe I'm going to Lord Emsworth's, he is all the crack. You're saying he is the very best, she is the very best. Now, interestingly, we don't use that expression anymore, except in the negative version. You have likely used the expression, well, that wasn't all it was cracked up to be. So that wasn't all it was effusively praised up to be. We still use that expression now, but we don't use the positive term, all the crack. So perhaps you could say to a friend, you've got to watch this new series, it's all the crack. You've got to read this book, it's all the crack. Obviously they'll think you mean something totally different to do with cocaine, but you can reassure them that this is a 200-year-old expression. The next two slang terms from the Regency period really tickle me because they are put-downs. To just hear the expressions themselves tells you a lot about how caustic and sharp and killing those in higher positions of society could be to those who were lower. So our next slang term from the Regency is beneath my touch. Now, on the face of it, beneath my touch may be something that you can feel, that you can sense. It is something beneath my touch. But let's contrast it with a different idiom, which is, it is out of my reach. And now we know what beneath my touch is. If you were to say of a circle of friends or a society you wanted to join that it was out of your reach, you are saying, I can't quite get there, I'm not high status enough just yet. But they would say of you back in the Regency day, if you were trying to move into their societies, maybe you were part of the nouveau riche, and you were trying to sort of get yourself classed as a lady or a gentleman, they would speak of you as being below their touch. In other words, I can't even reach to touch you. I'm not going to touch you for one, but you're so far away, you're so far beneath me that were I to try and condescend, I couldn't even grasp hold of your hand. You are beneath my touch. And that is such a crazy put down. Not that I'm advising putting people down, mind you, just to say that. Say you wish to put an argument or a dispute or a conversation with someone who is being obnoxious, put it all to an end, you could say, I'm afraid I'm not going to carry on talking with you as you are beneath my touch. That is such an icy cool and sharp statement. I wonder how anyone could give you a comeback on it without doing something aggressive, hence losing their deportment and their refinement. So, beneath my touch, that was number 9. In number 10 is one of the funniest slang terms which reveal the mind of the upper classes more than anything else. And this is often pointed at the new rich, the nouveau riche. People who are trying to break into a higher society. They have got more money than the high society lot, but to maintain their position, they work on form and refinement and class themselves as better bred than those who have got more money, the merchants and the mill owners. And a slang expression the aristocrats would use about the new rich was an encroaching mushroom. This is referring to someone who is trying to crawl their way into higher society. Don't you just love this? An encroaching mushroom. They are some obnoxious fungi that comes from the mouldy, mildewy, damp and soggy base floor, and they have crawled their way up the structures and are coming in at the windows of good society merely through riches. So let's say you have Timothy and Alice Gainsborough, the children of the cotton merchant Gainsborough, who is amassing great wealth up north and trying to expand his social horizons for his children. You, of an aristocratic background, might be talking to your friends in the conservatory one day and say, "Oh, have you heard that the Gainsboroughs are coming tonight?" And someone else out of town says, "Who are the Gainsboroughs?" And you say, "Oh, a pair of encroaching mushrooms." And it means they are from the new rich. They do not belong in our society, but they've crawled their way in. So there you are, 10 different slang terms from the Regency period. We've had Friday-faced, we've had mute as Mumchance, Ladybird, bird of paradise, the cut Circumbendius, in Twig, or out of Twig, the pinkest of the pinks, all the crack, beneath my touch, and encroaching mushroom. So if somebody is crawling into your society whom you do not like, try using that when talking about them. They're such an encroaching mushroom. Now I hand it over to you to go about and sprinkle these delightful little idioms into your everyday conversation and see what reaction you get from people. Leave your comments below on your favourite one, get in touch with me on Instagram, I'll leave my handle down below, and let me know how your conversations go. Until the next video, I wish you joy in your reading.